Welcome everybody to Voices from the Past, our late show, which of course will be focused every week on some new, fantastic old document. I really do enjoy having a look at these things, and this week we are focused completely and totally and absolutely on I was going to say the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but that's coming up in a few weeks. In reality, we are focused on the Book of Giants this week. Now, this is a fascinating thing because essentially there was just a little passing glance, if you like, in Genesis in the Bible. And though this isn't focused on the Bible, I want everybody to just back the bus up just a fraction and acknowledge actually that the Bible comes as a compilation of a lot of other texts, a lot of other writings, things that were put out there by people that predated the birth of Jesus by significant periods of time, and we don't even know if it originated with those particular individuals. So the Book of Giants comes from the Enochian tablets or the Enochian writings, which weren't really well known, although Enoch was. He was well known, Enoch himself, to the ancients, but he was pretty obscure when it comes to the modern biblical writings, if you like, or not so much the modern biblical writings, but Bible readers, I should say. Besides giving 365 years, living 365 years, the book of Genesis says of him only that he walked with God, and afterward he was taken. God has taken him. He is gone because God has taken him. And that's Genesis 5:24. The fact that he is mentioned, however, briefly and successively, he is mentioned in a few other sort of places, but he's also mentioned in such a mysterious way that it's tantalizing, really, because you're talking about the fact that he made it into this book, this origin book, the Genesis book, but there wasn't much said about him. And you don't know if this is deliberate or if this is what was kept, in the 300 years after the death of Christ, when I will call him Jesus, actually. I'm not really a Christian, so to speak, and a Christ believer so much. But when Constantinople ordered the building of a singular book, a book that everybody could use, there were definitely books that didn't make the cut. There were texts that didn't make the cut. But now we want to admit or look at something like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has revealed this to us, which were hidden. They were hidden because of war, because they were being raped and pillaged. The Roman Empire was marching on their area. We had the Crusades. There was all sorts of stuff going on through a period that these texts were hidden. So they weren't necessarily available to be added to this group, which also says that over this period of time, there was a need to understand that even the religious leaders of their day had not necessarily seen these texts. So they're not necessarily deliberately left out, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. But that could have been the case, because when we look at things a little bit later, and we will, the Noah area of Noah and the Ten Commandments, etc., we do need to then acknowledge that there's something that predates those. Even the Ezekiel visions come under fire a little bit. They become a little bit questionable as original pieces, original writings. So that's what excites me, as we're looking at something that predates something we believed was an original writing. How's that? And since we already established last week in the first episode that the Dead Sea Scrolls pretty much show that the Torah, not the Bible as we know it, but the Torah is pretty much written word for word from that original document. The Western Bible, as we know it, takes excerpts of that and, of course, has played around with it quite a bit to suit themselves. So quite an interesting thing. And, of course, as you go further and further, the newer the writings, and of course we're basically talking the Old Testament, not the New Testament anyway, basically these writings all got a little bit agendized depending on who was writing them. So having been a reader of the Good News for Modern Man, because yes, I went into the Jehovah thing for a wee while, brought up with the Anglican Church, the truth is that as I see it, we don't pay enough attention to the writings, to the text, to the words. I see people quoting things left, right and centre that suit what they want to say in the minute and completely ignoring the unpleasant bits. And I think if you don't read it all, you are really, you're batting nothing, naught for naught, I say, because you don't understand it in context to the rest. You don't understand that it's not a book. It's not a book. It is a whole lot of writings by a whole lot of different authors, and some they're not even sure ascribed, even though the name is there, it's not necessarily ascribed to the right person. We have a question: how do you get from Iran and this is what we're talking about, and Persia with names like Matthew, Mark, etc., etc. You know, something's changed somewhere. So when we start looking at these origins and these original people like Enoch, you've got big, huge questions around them. The interesting thing is that he's lived for 365 years, or did live for 365 years, or is claimed to have. He's got this writing that's become something of a legend in itself from the 1947 discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the most important anthology and the oldest is known as the Book of Enoch. This is what we're talking about today. And it's built up over 100 chapters, and it still survives in its entirety, although only in the Ethiopic language, please note, and forms an important source of what the thought of Judaism is in the last few centuries BCE, right? That's before Christ era, not before the birth, BCE and so on. So we're talking about era. Current era, not Christ era, sorry, before the current era. So there's an era that's considered up to the birth of Christ, and then there's an era that's considered after the birth of Christ, not after the death, which is the AD thing that was around. Now, the remnants of several almost complete copies of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic are found along with among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is interesting in itself. So we've got the bits that went into Genesis or got found were bits and pieces found with the Ethiopic language, and then we've found with the Dead Sea Scrolls this Aramaic, which is an older language, which actually there are those that question whether Jesus spoke this language or not, and the question becomes slightly sideways because these texts or this language is being modernized in a consistent way, just as languages today. It's common usage, if you like. But the writings and the sacred writings held true to these languages. They became the language of spirit, including Sanskrit. This is how they wrote these things down so that other scholars could understand them, so that other teachers, but it also narrowed down the field of modernization. So we lose the ability to interpret them accurately. We put our modern spin on. As a word changes its meaning through maybe 1,000 years or even a couple of hundred years, as it changes that meaning a little bit, our interpretation of something ancient that uses it can be quite skewed. So we've always got to be aware of that without necessarily charging too much in it. Now, when we are looking at the Book of Enoch, the Aramaic, which are found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's clear that whoever collected the scrolls considered it a vitally important text because they collected these scrolls to preserve them. That's why they were there. All but one of the 5 major components of the Ethiopic anthology have turned up among the scrolls, but even more intriguing is the fact that additional, previously little-known texts about Enoch were discovered at the Qumran caves, and the most important of these, as I see it today, is the Book of the Giants. And the reason because it did get such a glancing look in the Bible, and yet we have it in its entirety, pretty much outside of degradation, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which says it was actually quite a large work. There was a lot known about it. So if we start looking at Enoch first, let's have a look at Enoch himself. He was a 7th generation human. Now, that means, of course, if you ascribe to the Bible's idea or the Genesis idea of Adam and Eve, bearing in mind that is the Old Testament, he predates that writing, whether you believe the story or not. We are considering him, Enoch, as the author of the Book of Enoch, and the 7th generation of the birth of man, however you want to put that there. However that came about, whether you're even talking about visitors from other worlds or whether you believe in the Adam and Eve, it doesn't really matter. We are saying this dude, he goes back a long way, right? And he's also writing a very long way back. So it's an interesting aspect as well. We've got this age thing, and this has been the fascinating, forgetting the giant part, which is going to come in shortly. We are talking about people who lived an inordinately long time, and they're mentioned only in the Book of Genesis, and that whole thing gets lost. So there is a possibility of a separate group of evolution, if you like, of human beings. And we make this mistake in the modern world of thinking, there was Homo sapiens, kaboom. That's not how it went, and it's not how it went at all. Once we started standing up, there were 2 human species, as in species. Before that, there were like 5 or 6. There may be more. That's a whole different argument, story, question, whatever. But once we start standing up, we've got 2. We've got Homo sapiens and Homo ergaster. And these are in our fossil record. That is, they are proven, not guessed at. By the cranial capacity of these 2 is where the missing link comes in, because prior to that, anything that we found, and believe, and let's focus on that too. When we are talking about these, we are only talking about evidentiary proof. That means they found remains. How long remains could even exist, we don't really know. And so what you don't find could be quite different. It may not be there to be found, or it may be so submerged below the earth that we're not quite in the position to find it at this stage, and may never find it. Needle in a haystack being the truth. So if we come back here, the cranial capacity had doubled 850 centimeters, that's it, 850 centimeters. Now, between this period and the period of Homo ergaster and Homo sapiens, the 2 species of human, such an increase in human brain size is equivalent to each generation. That's the children you have, and then the children they have, having 125,000 more neurons than their parents, which is kind of fantastical in the terms of evolution. So this is the missing link. It's not a link between apes and upright man so much. It's the link between this change. What happened to this change is the burning question. Now, what if we are just missing a particular species, perhaps these giants, perhaps this whole area, or this is where people sort of determine, I suppose, that is where people speculate that there may have been some kind of extraterrestrial hand in this. In this case, the Book of Giants tells us actually fallen angels might be that, and where you place that is entirely up to you. You may place that in your mind, in your belief, as an extraterrestrial alien entities. It may be a different species of human, by the way, that kept themselves fairly separate and pure. And then things changed and they decided to imbibe. But back to the story of these giants. We're talking about something we may have lost too in the equation, that we may be the weaker that survived rather than the stronger that survived. So there's a question in there as well. The rumps of the litter may have been a bit more aggressive, who knows. But back we go. Instead of us sort of evolving, we may have devolved, which is something that I think a little bit. But it's believed anyway that Homo erectus and Homo ergaster, sorry, I said Homo sapien, they're both Homo sapien, Homo erectus and Homo ergaster were the first to use fire and complex tools. So this is, again, evidentiary. Now we are talking, are you ready? As they were the first hominid line to leave Africa, spreading throughout Africa, Asia, and Europe between 1.3 and 1.8 million years ago. Now, we're talking about writings, and we're thrilled about these writings and these evidentiary ideas that man is putting down on paper. Now he's writing things down. He's writing prophecies, visions, his experience, things that we all strive for today. But 1.3 to 1.8 million years ago, man existed and was standing up and he was wandering around, okay? He was exporting himself to different parts of the world. Now, we've got proof of that, interestingly enough. So my point being, the missing link, whatever that might be, may not be quite so missing. It may be just lost, if you like. It might be just that we have had perhaps maybe more than those 2 upright erectus type humans running around on the planet at the time. Just a possibility, or we could have had the angels fall out of the sky, or we could have had extraterrestrial beings come to Earth. It's definitely a question. It's definitely worth exploring. It is definitely worth checking out. We also need to sort of add that the potentials that there are for information that predates Enoch and predates the earliest writings we've found. Please note too that these were saved. If they weren't saved, they would be lost to us forever. They would have been, either been destroyed, burned, name what you like. They could have just been destroyed by time, which happens. We know it happens. With all of that being the case, that they were drawing and writing on parchments, on leather, on copper, on all sorts of surfaces to keep it for the future. The interesting part there is if it wasn't preserved, the fact that it's lost doesn't mean it didn't exist, right? So this whole book of Enoch is amazing. It's filled with hallucinatory visions of heaven, hell, angels and devils. Well, not really devils. If you read it, he doesn't kind of go there. They do mention demons, though, which are an abomination, monsters. Enoch introduced concepts such as fallen angels, the appearance of a Messiah, resurrection, a final judgment, a heavenly kingdom on earth, interspersed with this material or quasi-scientific digressions on calendrical systems, geography, cosmology, astronomy, meteorology. It's such a broad range. You've got this man as an incredible scholar, or he is a scribe. He claims to have these visions. And the interesting thing to note is if he's the scribe writing all of this down in the first person and then talking about others, we have a question that is burning inside me is who's he writing about? Whose experiences are these? And the reason I put that out there is because we've all, some of these things that you're going to hear today are written there to be read in real words, predating who we thought said them first, which are usually represented in the Bible or somewhere else. It's quite an amazing thing. Now imagine, if you will, just imagine, if you will, Enoch lived before the flood during a time when the world was very different. Human beings lived much longer, for one thing. In general, Enoch's son Methuselah, for instance, attained the age of 969 years. Another different, and we can't ignore the name, by the way. Methuselah and some mythical gods and goddesses are very similar in their names later on. Another difference was that angels and humans interacted freely back then in this period. So freely, in fact, that some of the angels, decided to pop down to earth. And this is a fact neutrally reported in Genesis, as we mentioned already, but other stories view this episode as the source of the corruption that made the punishing flood necessary. Now, we've got to assume from a religious perspective that the flood is punishment of God. There's a belief in there. Now, things start to get a bit jaded because in certain writings of Enoch, and I do urge you to go and find them because you can find the book of Enoch and read it and read the original interpretations with its gaps, and you can read the bits without the gaps. But he also refers to in his book as a son and a god, the son as an S-U-N, in a godlike way. So that being the case, as soon as we start talking about the punishment of the gods, there's a question around that, because if we have a belief in the sun and the moon, which he clearly mentions a few times, having these power over the earth, which they do, by the way, we're now not talking a subjective God belief. We could be talking plain straight out. We understand that the weather kind of is our destruction or our life. A very interesting aspect that seems to be repeatedly ignored in favor of turning things into something else, which I think is agendized anyway. Another difference from that time is, according to the book of Enoch, the mingling of angels and humans was actually the idea of Sharon-Hazar, the leader of the angels that were fallen. Now, in the interpretations, they quite often say the evil angels, but he never actually says that. He never says that at all. But what came from this, it was a rebellion of angels. There's no doubt about that. Even the way he talks about it, even the reason that they did it, it all becomes very interesting to me. There's also the interesting aspect that every angel spoken of in the book of Enoch is masculine. That's a male energy, finding a female attractive on this earth. So you could liken that, if you wanted to predict extraterrestrial origins, that these guys were floating around in the sky perhaps and missing women, right? And then after a while the humans start looking a bit attractive. But there is some interesting interpretations of word, even the word human, which suggests that it's like from the fields, from the pastures. There's fascinating stuff to go into, but it becomes a bit mind-bending if you don't relax a little bit with it. But these angels beget the giants. They weren't themselves the giants. That by fornicating, but by becoming wed with earthly women, they created these beings, and these beings were the giants, or were considered the giants. They were somewhere between the angel and the human. the fascinating aspect of this is that we come into the point that, we've now got what they consider crimes. And these angels were the watchers. They watched, according to the book of Enoch, they watched the trees go. They watched the cycles of the sun. They watched the cycle of the moon. They watched the development of humans, even. They watched everything, and were called the watchers, not angels. Let's go there. And it came to pass when, this is a quote, chapter 6.1 of Enoch, chapter 6, paragraph 1. And it came to pass, bear in mind, I've got to say this again, this is not the Bible. It's not from the Bible. This is the book of Enoch, and none of the Bible actually comes from the Bible. It was added to the Bible at choice. So as ancient writings, it's always worth the exploration, right? It came to pass when the children of men had multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heavens, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Samaja, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders, Zimeazaz, I think. Their leader, Arakiba, Ramiel, Kilkabil, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel. Please note the names, people. Barakiel, Azael, Amaros, Batarel, and I know I'm pronouncing them wrong, please don't slay me, Ananiel, Zakiel, Zamzabiel, Zatariel, Turiel, Jomagiel, and Sariel. All of these names, if not all of these names, many of these names you hear as angels. You'll see them touted everywhere. You have to ask a question. And also, I can't ignore Ezekiel, because later on in the Bible, we have Ezekiel spelled a little bit different, but also he has these visions, and he's the prophet in the Bible. We've also got Daniel in here. The other prophet in the Bible is Daniel. So there are questions whether these were taken from the book of Enoch and given their own chapters under their own names without necessarily being the origin. We're starting to look at the potential of the Bible chapters themselves being a direct rip-off of the Enochian tablets, the Enochian writings, but not together in the complete. So that means they are now taken out of context. And they're also put in a different time zone. They're put in a time zone that postdates when they actually would have been written, which was previous to Genesis in the beginning. So now you're starting to look at something that looks more recent than it actually was. And also, because of being written by Enoch and the way it was put out there by Enoch, we're really looking at something that actually is the vision. That's something that lends itself to people who did exist later. Now, we can sit there and ask ourselves, did Ezekiel actually exist as a person later on and write all of that down, or is it directly from Ezekiel, this angel, this being that came to earth? Stunning question for me anyway. All of the others took with them unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. Defile themselves as in, they had sex. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots and made them acquainted with plants. In other words, they educated them. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. Now, I meant to go and look at what an ell is. I did forget to do that, but go look it up, because I know you can. I've looked it up once before, but I've forgotten. that they consumed all the acquisitions of men, and then when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against it and devoured mankind, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and to drink the blood. And then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Now, this chapter, the Watchers, comes from the section of dreams, I think it is. Moreover, as Azazel, so we go down now to the individual angels. This is what they did. As Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, and fabrications of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint and the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and kind, and all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. This is talking about an advancement in technology for man. Impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. Amazarek taught all the sorcerers and the dividers of roots, so we're talking like doctors really. Armers taught the solution of sorcery. Barakael taught the observers of the stars. Now we've got astronomy. Observers of the stars, astrologers, astronomers. Akabil taught signs. Tamil taught astronomy. And as Sardel taught the motion of the moon. These are actually direct from the book of Enoch, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way. And as Saredal taught the motion of the moon, and men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached to heaven. Now, when you look at Adam and Eve, you have the same kind of story, that as soon as people had knowledge, they kind of ruined themselves, that they were better off being ignorant, they were better off not knowing, or in some way knowledge itself becomes, or what is considered to be a sin, and I find that kind of fascinating. But here we have Enoch actually telling us that these watchers that came to earth, they actually taught man and advanced mankind. They changed mankind, which is phenomenal in itself. And then we move back to these called angels of the modern world, and then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, which he's written in by name, just those four, looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth, and they said one to another, the earth made without inhabitant cries, and the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. Quite fascinating words. Here we have the origin, if you like, even though it's a sleep vision, not a reality in life, of fallen angels, also known as the Nephilim, and the creation of the giants being the children of the union between these, apparently all male, angels and human women, or watchers and human women. They go on, it goes on to say, you made all things, you possess power over all things, and all things are open and manifest before you. You behold all things, and nothing can be concealed from you. This tells you that these were a dominant society. These angels, these watchers, were a dominant society. They had a lot more knowledge than the humans of the day, at the very least. Even if you take away all ideals of angelic sinning, even if you take away all ideals of what a human is versus, something else, you've got a race of people, or you've got a group of people that are organized. They understand things that humans of the time did not, and they taught them, which gives us an advancement. But we've also got a secondary group of people that come from the same place, another group of angels now, who look down upon this and see this is wrong. This is not what's meant to be happening. So I can think back to all of the teachings I've had of angels on all sorts of spiritual levels, and one of the notable things about that is that angels are supposed to have non-interference policies, and this seems to come back to that we've now got a whole group of 200 waltzing on down to earth and interfering with mankind in ways, unprecedented ways. We have them go on to say, you have seen what Azazel has done, how he has taught every species of iniquity upon earth, and has disclosed to the world all the secret things which are done in the heavens. That just says one thing to me, knowledge, nothing more. It says that's it. When we talk about the heavens, if you go back to origin speech, etymology, the word heavens originally just meant sky originally. Now we've got all sorts of other things, but we still use the word heavens to describe the sky, but originally that's all it meant. So if we think about that, we've got some pretty good questions starting to form in our little brains. And the Zays are also taught sorcery, to whom you have given authority over those who are associated with him. They have gone together to the daughters of men and have lain with them and have become polluted. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And have discovered crimes to them, discovered crimes, or in the interpretation revealed these sins, discovered crimes. I think it's about the word trust. If you take a controlling group, it's just like the emperor, if he goes and grabs a woman off the street, grabs her and drags her into his den and has his way with her. He's not committing a crime against the law, but he is committing an ethical crime if she is unwilling. There is a crime to be seen. And the same when you talk about the paedophiles of the day. Just because a person has power doesn't mean that they should be doing these things, and it can be frowned upon even if there is no recourse, even if there's no way to take it back. So we don't know if these women were willing or otherwise, or what the story was with them. The women likewise have brought forth giants, and this becomes a powerful thing to talk about, because the book of giants is what it's about. We're talking about the giants of the day, and they don't quite believe that they weren't actual giants. There was what was one of the Celtic giants, Finn, of the Irish or Welsh, I'm not too sure, Finn might be Welsh, and he got into an amazing battle against a Scottish giant when they discovered each other were in neighbouring lands. Until they discovered that there was peace, and they built this wall, or they had this war, and it was said that he was 16 metres tall and 16 feet tall. I can't remember now. Both are a phenomenal size, but the feats that were ascribed to them meant they had to be bigger than that, and that they lived for many years, and that they ruled their lands, and they took beautiful human women as their partners. But it's acknowledged through these myths that they actually weren't human. And this is the question, isn't it, right there? They weren't quite human. They weren't quite the same as the rest of us. And then because we have this great conflagration in the ancient Eastern world with these, and we're going to get to that, the destruction of the angels, the chances are pretty good that they ran off, right? They ran off somewhere else. They did move from place to place, that they didn't stay centered, but they may not have been able to procreate, and that becomes important. That may have been a major issue. When you evolve something, you can't necessarily keep it going. The original order of things is sort of diluted as time goes by, so their children and their children and their children may devolve back to just human, if you like, throwing the odd big one out now and again. As we move back onto that, we've got now the souls of those who are dead. There's a concern that those who have died that were made of this union between angels and humans, they've got nowhere to go. They can't go to the heavens. They can't go back to where they come from. In other words, they're not accepted anywhere, and we see that, don't we? In mixed race now, they're not accepted by one group or the other group. They're not considered anything by both groups. So both groups are eschewing them. They are putting them out there. They complain even then at the gate of heaven. They would not let them back. Done. Their groaning ascends, nor can they escape from the unrighteousness which is committed on earth. You know all things before they exist. So they're saying these guys that did this, these guys that jumped off their spaceship or jumped out of heaven as angels, whatever they were doing, and came down to earth to copulate with the human women, knew what they were doing, knew, even though the humans at the time didn't. Hi, Kathy. They knew what they were doing, and because they knew what they were doing, that made it a crime. So again, you've got these educated, well-versed, understanding, knowing the cycles of life group of people. They knew that it was a crime for them to do it. They knew that they were breaking a rule and that they shouldn't have done that, and because they did that, none of it was accepted. So everybody sort of got into trouble, the ignorant as well as those in the know. What on account of these things ought we do to them? This is in the book of Enoch. Then the Most High, the Great and the Holy One spoke and sent Asalalur to the son of Lamech. And Asalalur, I'm really saying that badly, but there's just too much in there. There's one Greek text which suggests that the Asalalur actually is Uriel, by the way. So we've got this crossover between what we think of as good angels and not so good angels and these powers that be. But the truth is they're all kind of bloodthirsty. And saying to him, in my name, conceal yourself, and then explain to him the consummation which is about to take place, for all of the earth shall perish. Now this is Enoch's vision. All of the earth shall perish. For all the earth shall perish. The waters of the deluge shall come over the whole earth, and all things which are in it shall be destroyed. Now we know that did not happen. We know that it was just in a particular area, and we know that it probably did happen. We have got seas that have dried up. We have got seas that are created. That's a natural cycle of the planet. Now, we've got Enoch having these dreams, and he's seeing this fantastical stuff, and this is all about what is going on. Now, who is he? He's the great-grandfather of Noah, by the way. So this is passed on to his son, and he mentions later that he tells his son Methuselah, who lives for 900 years, he lives for 365 years, that they are both definitely alive when Noah is born. So did Noah's vision, actually, was it Noah's vision? Or again, are we saying Noah really, although he existed, his story is still just a chapter out of the book of Enoch? Are we now looking at all of these parts of the Bible being all from the book of Enoch and being ascribed again to different lives and different times? Nobody's ever proven that there was ever an ark built, just so as we're clear. Nobody could ever figure out, well, there wasn't an actual world deluge, as it were. If there was, we really would have nothing of information about that. So what we do know is that we are now looking at the book of Noah, the story of Noah being written 300 years or so, 1,000 or so years, 300 or so, hang on, let me get this right, 300 or so years before the book of Genesis was written. There we go. So a long time before the book of Noah. What the Bible does, though, is because they've put things together the way they have, they put them together as separate events. They put them together as Noah was told by God, Noah was talked to by God. And here we've got Enoch saying, I'm his great-grandfather, and I knew. And then I told my son, Methuselah, and then he would have told his son, Methuselah being the grandfather of Noah. Now, all of these men, because they lived for 365 years, because they lived for 98 years for Methuselah, were well and truly still alive long after Noah was born, well into his adulthood. They may even have lived just about as long as him. So we've got this really interesting thing. Now we get the question of, if they're living for this long period of time, and, I've forgotten to even put my pictures forward. Whoops, sorry. Got all excited and forgot to put them through. This is a representation of Enoch, and he was the first, as we go on to Ezekiel, to talk about eagles and bulls and lions and stuff like that, which is interesting. So Ezekiel's book now, to me, looks more like another chapter that came from Enoch, which is, of course, 100 chapters long. You know, it's a pretty big text. It's a pretty out there kind of a thing. It's also been copied, predating Genesis, into 3 or 4 copies in 2 different languages. So we've got the Ethiopic and then we've got the Aramaean. Therefore, somebody else thought it was pretty important as well, and pretty important to preserve it and to keep it. So essentially, this one book of Enoch could be classed and called to, Enoch could be called the father of all religion, really, whether you're talking Islam, Muslim, whether you're talking Christianity, doesn't matter what you're talking here. We've got all of these groups that talk about, even the Buddhists talk about the guy is coming down, the gods and the goddesses coming down to earth. There's a theme that just seems to run through them all. What are we talking about? Is there some significance to the 7 torches? Well, when you get into that, I have to say no, because this is an artist representation much later. When you read it, you can go and read it. There's a PDF in Sacred Text. You can actually read the interpretation. My problem with all the translation, not interpretation. My problem with all of translation is the people that translate it are religious people as a rule. So when it's translated by Jews, I suppose, there's the words that have a generalized meaning from their time become modernized in their interpretation a little bit, if not a lot. So quite fascinating. The seven torches, all that you're looking there, he talks about the eagle and the bulls, which of course is in Ezekiel's dream much later. So you've got these people making this painting with an awareness. This is pretty old, so not necessarily the awareness of the whole of the Enochian text, but the awareness of what's said about him in the Bible and what they believe about him beyond that. So it's an interesting thing. So I've got to say I don't believe so. Any artist interpretation can only have the significance of the artists, I suppose. You can go and read the Enochian Book of Giants. The chapters of Enoch that relate to the giants is called The Watchers, which is about the chapters 6 to 16, 10 chapters out of the 100. When we talk about chapters, some of them are just a paragraph, so don't be intimidated by it, and it is easy to read. And then as you read it, I just think we need to keep a slightly open mind to the interpretations of certain words because they don't sort of add up when you read all of it together. It's kind of an interesting thing because he starts out saying the watchers and then suddenly the word angels appears and you start going, well, what are we talking about here? Did he actually change the what he called them, or did the interpreter change it because that's what they decided to believe as soon as they read the names Michael and, as soon as they got past the original names and were looking at Michael and Uriel and Raphael and Gabriel, were they perhaps suddenly deciding, they were angels, these first lot, because the second lot were angry with them. It's a question, nothing more. We talked last week in the Dead Sea Scrolls about how the names of the angels were refused. They never gave them. I can remember one of my first experiences with another entity outside of Nathaniel. This entity, who I believed to be just a Scots person, said straight out to me, you won't be able to say my name. And I went, okay then. And I can remember asking a couple of different individuals that I was having these kind of mental gymnastics with at the time that would say to me, no, you wouldn't be able to pronounce my name. But that does not mean anything beyond I wouldn't be able to pronounce their name. It doesn't mean that they are angels. It doesn't mean that they are extraterrestrial. I'm struggling already with the names we've got here, so they could be perfectly correct that I wouldn't be able to pronounce their name. So they give you something simple, right? Oh yeah, she can say that. Good as gold. That's not belittling, and it's not superior. It's common sense to make it easy for me if we're going to have an interaction. We go back to the book of Enochs, and Gabriel also, the Lord said, go to the biters, by the way, to the reprobates, to the children of fornication, and destroy the children of fornication, the offspring of the watchers. So now we've got back to the watchers. From among men, bring them forth and excite them one against another. Let them perish by mutual slaughter, for length of days shall not be theirs. Interesting. And then, of course, the word biters is interpreted to mean bastards, which was Charles, page 73, Michael A. Nibb, in the translation, the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. So bearing in mind, that's an interpretation. The word is biters. Now, I think that maybe we could stay with the word biters because it's a very basic ideal, isn't it, that biters is not a good thing, right? They could be very primitive as well, fighting types. But here we go. Gabriel, this angel of the modern day, is sent along to actually lie, to play the role of a hidden spy and get them all to hate each other. That's his role. Woohoo! Her role. Take your pick. So we can't necessarily sit there and go, these are all good angels, I'll hear an angel talk to me. I don't want to hear anybody else because an angel will give me the truth. Really? Are we sure about that? They shall all entreat you, but their fathers shall not obtain from their wishes respecting them, for they shall hope for eternal life and what they may live, each of them 500 years. So he's saying these children, this is about the children of the coupling, will live 500 years, each of them. And yet we have Enoch himself saying Methuselah, his son, lived for 938 years. So the question becomes, is Enoch and is his son, are they in actual fact visitors themselves, are they in fact, not of the children, or are they the children? It's a question. Who are they that they are living these inordinate years, and then life is to be shortened to 500 years, and Methuselah lived to 998 or somewhere in there. There's a whole lot of things. Then we come back to this interesting idea: destroy all the souls addicted to dalliance. Dalliance, I tell you, dalliance. Which the offspring of the Watchers. Go destroy them all, for they have tyrannized over mankind. So they're going, these guys are ruling the roost, they're in charge of mankind, and the powers that be, the ones where they came from, are not liking this very much. Now, Nib, in page 90 of his Charles translation, and page 76, they took the word dalliance, and they translated it as lust. Well, dalliance, we know, has a deeper, committed actual feeling. You have a dalliance with somebody, which is an affair, but that also includes having fun, enjoying yourself. There's a dalliance is a nice side, what would we call it? A side relationship. It's not like your primary, but it's not permanent necessarily, but it's nice. Every oppressor perish from the face of the earth. This is the book of Enoch. Let every evil work be destroyed, and the plant of righteousness and of rectitude appear, and its produce become a blessing. Righteousness and rectitude shall forever be planted with delight. Now, we're back to understanding, and I need to remind you that all of this that we're reading to you is Enoch's dream. By the way, Enoch's dream. But there are real people intertwined into this, which is why the 100 chapters carries weight. So all we're looking at here is the chapters, there's 10 chapters that allude to the Watchers, which then gets cross-referenced with angels, which I think came later. I really like that. If they're called the Watchers, let's stick with that. They're the Watchers. And what they knew was incredible, what they knew. Like all the old information, there's a fairly modern spiritual spin on it. Some of it's religious based, and it doesn't matter if they say they're not religious. A lot of modern spiritual New Age people actually are touting religious concepts. We've got Caroline Mice with her Book of Miracles is basically just an evolutionary look at a religious text. It's not really anything different to that. And it's a way of trying to attract people to a scripture, if you like, that's written in a more modern way, I guess. And it allows everybody to get something out of it without going to church, I guess. There's this whole slant of things, but we need to talk about these abominations because the story of Atlantis and the New Age spin on Atlantis is that they were destroyed and they were sunk below the water. So now let's talk about this flood again. They were sunk below the water because they started experimenting with humans and animals. They were a superior human race that had a highly spiritual, evolved psyche, if you like, and mind, but they had no emotion as humans have emotion, and therefore they had no compassion, and they experimented. So this story sort of pops out there in a few different ways, coming from original writings, coming from these Akkadian texts and these Ethiopic writings and this Dead Sea Scrolls. Even though the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't discovered till 1947, the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls were doing the rounds in different ways for centuries upon centuries, millennia, for thousands of years. But then we've got the specific part in here where Enoch says there were 200 angels, 200 donkeys, 200 asses, 200 sheep and rams of the flock, 200 goats, 200 beasts of the field, from every animal and from every bird for experiments. This is an ad-lib. This isn't actually written in there. They've added this in the translation for experiments in breeding with humans, but all it actually goes on to say is, and all types of miscegenation, whatever you want to call it. That could very well be likened to our modern hybridization techniques or working of what's best to evolve things. But we can't ignore that this text right here is a mirror for the Noah text, which talks about popping these animals in an ark 2 by 2, every breed, every this, there's 2 of everything, and now we've got 200, 200, 200. So it could be a misquote, in other words, is what I'm saying here. It could be a misquote of what's in here. But this still predates any flood. We're talking about this is what was brought with them. This is what they had. While we're still mainly talking about dreams and visions, the lines do get blurred, because straight after all of this, we get Gilgamesh speaks. Now, Gilgamesh says, quote unquote, I am a giant, and by my mighty strength and my arm, I can vanquish anyone mortal. I have made war with them, mortals, in the past, but I am not now able to stand against my opponents who reside in heaven and dwell in holy places. And not only this, but they are in fact stronger than I am. The day of the ravening wild beast has come, and that of the wild man, and then it's cut off from there. So anything else is ad-libbing. We just need to know that they're just filling the gaps. And where they fill the gaps, while it's tantalizing, it could be incredibly wrong, because that's a modern spin on an ancient document. Now, Gilgamesh speaks is important to me because he's generally seen by scholars as an historical figure, and since inscriptions have been found which confirm the existence of other figures associated with him in the epic, if Gilgamesh existed, he probably was a king who reigned sometime between 2800 and 2500 BC. There's the document itself, or part of the 100 pages. So as you can see, if you look at it anywhere, there's lots of missing bits. So where they fill those bits, while that's tempting for them to do so, they probably really shouldn't. So shy away from anything that fills them in. You can actually see them with the gaps in place, where you can read all the bits around it, and you get enough information to get a really good idea of what went on and what he was talking about, without necessarily changing the whole meaning of it by putting your own stuff in there. And I think that we really need to get a grip on that and understand that. So if we've got real people interspersed with these visions, just like parts of the Bible, it gets a little bit more tantalizing, a little bit more difficult. Is it upside down? Sorry about that, Chiefs. It gets a little bit more difficult to work out what's actually going on. You know, which part's the dream, which part's the vision. Enoch is given the job of taking this vision to the super beings, if you like, and to give them the vision and the message of their own destruction. Now, this is, again, a long time ago. The Sumerian king list claims that Gilgamesh ruled the city of Uruk for 126 years. So because he literally was 300 and, I said at the beginning, but forgotten, 65, something like that, we are talking a pretty big deal right there and right then. With the Book of Giants suggests that these men were men, that there is no mention of women in there at all. And so that in itself is interesting, that there were no women there at all. It sort of clearly shows his own distaste for what went on there. There's much evidence of one kind or another for this existence of giant beings, as I've mentioned earlier. They've even found skulls that were incredibly huge. And we can sit there now and go, oh, well, that's just an abomination. It's just a this or it's that. But is it? There's a question here, because we have this writing that is evidentiary of something that's a little bit different. Whether you accept evidence or not, it's up to an individual to do that. The Bible itself is a collation of stories to which credence may or may not be given, depending on what you choose to understand about it. But I think the bigger problem with any of these texts and these writings is the word interpretation, that as soon as we have an agenda with the interpretation, as soon as we make something what it wasn't originally intended to be, we're now in a little bit of trouble, because we are now changing the meaning of something drastically. Certainly, much emphasis at that time was placed on the existence of giants and the part they played in the biblical world. That is to do with Noah. That is to do with sin, if you like, the original sins, if you like. By the way, unearthed giant skulls. Look at that, near Victoria. I knew I had something in there. And then, of course, in Europe, you've got a lot of this information. You've got photos, you've got museum skulls and bodies. You see things being unearthed on occasion. We've got the talk in Daniel. Is it Daniel and the giant? Is it? No, it's not Daniel. Sorry. Is it the book of Daniel? Can't remember. we've got the giant appearing there to fight for humans. In actual fact, not the other way around. But was it? We don't know now because we've got a question. Was that what he was doing, or was he part of the ruling era and stepping forward because he was wanting to scare the other people? They definitely brought a bit of war, or they brought a bit of destruction into the game. There's this how the giants came into existence in the first place. We're told in Genesis that they played a large part in the early days of man's evolution, physical evolution. They also played a part in the destruction and the war mode of man by giving them technology, basically, according to Enoch. They gave us technology. What did we do with it? Well, we could see the parallels today, couldn't we? The relevant questions do need to be asked. And if we have a look at this dude here, that's Gilgamesh, or an idea of what Gilgamesh would look like. It's a very ancient statue. The relevant questions that need to be asked is, when writing itself is a major undertaking, one has to ask why anyone would write down anything that was not considered extremely important. Enoch himself, early on in his chapters, says, I taught myself to write. Now, does that make him a copyist of language? Did he copy all of the things that he wrote in his Enoch's chapters in his learning? Was he taught? I mean, what are we looking at here? A big question. I taught myself to write. There has to be something he had to teach himself from. Would you not agree to that? It's also to be noted that the only important people wrote things down. So it's considered that he would have been a powerful man. He is also known as the scribe of judgment, by the way, because he is judging all of these behaviors. So perhaps it's his judgment, his distaste, his displeasure, which starts determining the idea of good versus evil. This is evil because it's bad, but does that mean, that man didn't kill himself before, but now somebody's got an advantage because of it? And then if he was living for that long period of time, you get to see the world change drastically. We're lucky to get to 100, and we see the world change incredibly in our lifetimes. And we have an awareness of how it changed in our parents' lifetimes. We've also got a good idea of how it's going to change in the future, basically because of the technologies we have. So imagine if these people who were claimed that, the watchers that came down knew about the future, they knew about the cycles of life, they knew about cosmetology, astrology, astronomy, they knew all of that and gave it to us. Quite an interesting thing all by its own self. These are the questions that we should be asking. References to giants in mythological writings throughout the world, across the planet at different eras where interaction wasn't necessarily known, coming forward from time to time, word of mouth. There's a question, right? Even though we've got that, it's clear the Enochian texts have been quoted repeatedly in various biblical areas, even Ezekiel's references to the visions where he talks about the eagles, the bulls, he talks about the wheels, the spinning wheels and the light. Now we're starting to determine perhaps these were Enoch's dreams, not Ezekiel's visions. And then we go back to a reminder, just a little reminder, that all of the years before this happened, before Ezekiel was supposedly born, we have one of these watchers' name is Ezekiel, spelled Ezekiel, Ezekiel. We've got the book of Daniel, the other prophet. We have a Daniel, D-A-N-E, short L. Daniel is part of the equation here. We have these amazing questions that just looking at the book of Enoch should bring into your mind. It should ask you to question. So I think that's a fantastic thing. A lot of what I read tonight was quoted from the book of Enoch exactly as it's written. There's nothing I can do about the Aramaic because I don't know how to read it. So all you can do is find the educational and allow for the fact that if something starts as watchers, this is what I observed, it started as watchers, went back to watchers, and somewhere in the middle they put angels. That's interpretation to my mind, because consistency of writing is something that we actually recognize as something people do. When we start calling something by a particular name, we tend to keep doing that when we're writing, right or wrong. So I don't believe Enoch changed the word from watchers to angels at all. I really don't. I believe that somebody else did that. But next week, we're going to look at the code as a Gigars or Gigars, otherwise known as the Devil's Bible, which has nothing to do with the devil itself as such or the Bible. It's a really interesting thing. It is the largest medieval manuscript. It's the largest manuscript believed to ever be written, and no, that is not War and Peace, it's a single compilation. Fascinating stuff, people, and it's medieval, so we're coming a little bit more modern. And then on a Psychic Affair this week, Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. EST, I want you to just drop into the Enjoy Talks page on Facebook. Go join it, like it, do whatever you need to do it, and pop your pictures in, tag me in them, or just tag me in them. I get notifications anyway. We're doing food psychometry, so we want a photo of your favorite food, something you've cooked, something you've eaten, or go Google it. If you've got something you like, Google just food, see what pops up. Anything that you're attracted to, let's have a look at that, and I will read it for you. It's a bit of a fun show. It's always exciting. Everybody loves it. So your favorite food, get the picture of it. We'll pop it on there, and I will tell you why you want that food. It's always good. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and we'll catch you on the flip side. And remember, please, this week, don't be a part of your own problem. Ciao for now.